Okay, I guess that's it. Hi, I'm Gwen. I'm an alcoholic. I am delighted to be here, kind of, and I'm delighted to be at this meeting. How about that? But I want to start by saying thank you, Stephen. Um, the service that you provide to so many, I'm sure thousands of people with the daily ponderables, is just phenomenal. I have been a recipient for many years, and I have really appreciated all that you have done with that and your commitment to carrying the message. So thank you so much. Okay, I am an alcoholic. Did I say that yet? Well, in case I didn't, I am. I am one. And my sobriety date is September 13th, 1989. I have a sponsor, and my sponsor has a sponsor, and she has a sponsor. And I have been a grateful recipient of excellent sponsorship that has guided me through the steps and in living the steps, not just going through them, but actually putting them to work in my life. And that's the message I would like to share, because that has been my experience. I was born in a small town in South Carolina, and it was on Halloween with a full moon by C-section, which is the reason my mother said I never settled up quite right in my head. Now, this is the opinion of someone who was a hopeless alcoholic herself. So I grew up in an alcoholic family. Both of my parents were alcoholic. I had an older brother who was alcoholic. They all passed due to alcoholism. I am the only survivor, and a very grateful survivor. So in this town in South Carolina, where I grew up, I loved school. I did well in school. School was my refuge. As those of you who know, who have grown up in an alcoholic home, school was a lot calmer than my house was. I never knew exactly what I was going to find when I would get home from school, mainly with my mother. I did not know anything about alcoholism. I knew that alcohol was a part of our life. I knew that I loved alcohol, even as a small child. I would do a drive-by and steal my father's Pabst Blue Ribbon when he set it down on the table, and run and chug it as fast as I could, because I just loved beer. And that was when I was like 4 or 5 years old. My family also had a cure for anything that ailed you, and that was a glass of bourbon with a little honey in it and a little lemon. I don't know if any of you had that same recipe, but I was known to fake an illness every now and then just to get that cure, because I absolutely loved the way it felt going down. That warmth in your throat and hits your stomach, and I would, whoo, wonderful. I have never had any trouble with the taste of alcohol. I absolutely loved it. In my story, you won't get any, I don't have anything exciting. I got no sex, drugs, and rock and roll, none of that. But what I did have was a whole lot of drinking, because I loved alcohol. I loved wine, I loved beer, I loved liquor. And at the end, especially white liquor, vodka, just a glass of vodka with an olive in it, which would do just fine. So I did a lot of drinking. I preferred to drink alone. That was my, because nobody can say anything to you. Nobody will say, don't you want a little Coke in that? Or don't you want to put some ice in that? And I don't, those things just ruined it. So anyway, I'm in this town in South Carolina, and school is fine. When I go to high school, we had sororities and fraternities in the high school I went to, much like in colleges. And you could belong to more than one of them. And if you were invited to do that, and their main function was to have a couple of really big parties every year at the local hotel in the ballroom. and a policeman was hired to stand at the door, and that was to keep adults out. That was not to keep any anything from going on inside. And there was a lot of drinking going on in this town among high schoolers, and I drank some then, but it wasn't, because I did like it, but it wasn't a compulsion at that time. I enjoyed it, but it seems like we were always trying to manage the rowdy boys who were drinking too much. And that was more the aim rather than me getting drunk at the time. But it did set the stage for what was to come. And when I went off to college, I went to a small women's college in Columbia, South Carolina, a Methodist school, where when you went to the school, you had to sign a pledge in the church by candlelight, which made it even more solemn, that you would never take a drink of alcohol while you were enrolled at this school, whether it was while you were at the school or even if you were with your parents. And I had no trouble signing that because I was one of those kids who would tell you whatever you wanted me to say, just to keep the peace. And I would sign that, but I knew, that I probably would not be keeping that pledge. But the other part of that was that as the year went on, I found out that when someone was rumored to have contraband in their room, they had something called an honor board at this school, and they would do surprise midnight searches of the rooms to find out if anybody is hiding liquor or contraband hot plates and in their rooms. Well, I like to keep a bottle of vodka, and not that I could drink it every day at that time, but it made me feel good. It just made me feel secure if I had that vodka. So there were drop ceilings in this room, and it was very easy just to lift the ceiling panel and slip that bottle of vodka right up there. And I knew it was there, and I never got caught. And even if I couldn't drink it at that time, I knew it was there, and it made me feel secure. And I knew that I had it just in case I needed it. So when I finally graduated, before I graduated, I hooked back up with a boyfriend I had in middle school, and this guy that some of you know, Bob, and he was at Clemson at the time, and we kind of reacquainted ourselves with each other, and I would say that he really started me down the path of alcoholism. It's not that I'm placing blame, but I will say that it was at his urging that I started to drink more purposefully and found out exactly what alcohol could do for me. So we started on this relationship, and I finished school, and I guess it was 1968. I finished in 3 years because I went year round because I was in a hurry to get out and live my life. So, and we decided that was a good time for us to get married as well. So he went and talked to my father and asked for his permission for my hand in marriage, and my father said no. And so we waited a little while, and he went back again, and he asked him again, and he went, nope. And my father was not exactly happily married, and he didn't feel like anybody should get married before they were 40. And today, I think, he may have just been right. But anyway, I was much less than 40 and felt like I really should married. So the third time Bob goes back to talk to him, he tells him we are getting married and invites him to come because I'm getting married on my lunch hour at work. And when I was hired for this job in public relations for a healthcare organization, the boss had said, now, you aren't like about to get married or anything, are you? And I went, oh, no. absolutely not. I really wanted that job. And as usual, I will tell you anything I think, you want to hear that will get me what I want. I said, absolutely not. So I had to sneak to get married because, I went to work there in August. This is the 1st of October, same year. And we decided to get married. And I said, I'm going to do it on a Friday on my lunch hour and keep it a secret from my boss. And some people at work that I had confided in told him, and he actually gave me the afternoon off. So we go to a little church that I'm going to back up the night before our illustrious wedding. The minister that was going to marry us was was one of my college professors, and he was actually a Methodist minister. He was a cool guy, and we were more friends than anything. And he would listen to some of the stories of our antics, and he thought that those of us who were kind of breaking the rules a little bit were pretty funny, and he enjoyed those stories. So he's going to do some marriage counseling with us the night before we get married. And so we go over to his house, and he starts telling some of the funny stories he thinks that I've done through the years. And I'm thinking, he's going to tell about that vodka in the ceiling, because I had made a pledge to Bob that I would not drink unless he was present, because he didn't like somehow the result of my drinking. So he did not think it was safe for me to drink when he wasn't present. So I told him, of course, I'll only drink when you're there. But one more time, I did not mean that. So I was afraid the minister was going to say, and remember the vodka you put in the ceiling. And by damn, if he didn't just do that. And so I went, oh no, oh please. So I look at Bob, and he goes, I see the thunderclouds cross his face. He goes, I'm not doing this. She's a drunk and a liar. I'm not getting married to her. And we leave. And I went, damn. Well, my parents had said no to getting married, and they had actually made me choose between him and them, and I chose him. So I had made this choice, and now he's decided I'm a drunk and a liar, and we're not getting married. And, even though it was a little, what's that saying about calling the kettle black? But anyway, that's what he did. But we managed to make up by the next morning, and we decided to go through with it. And we go to a brand new little church with folding chairs instead of pews. And the minister is there to marry us. And my best friend from my hometown, her mother had convinced my mother that she was coming to get her and make her come to this wedding. So she drags my mother in, who is weeping loudly. And I mean, that kind of thing. And plus, as usual, my mother is drunk. She's weeping loudly. Robert's outside. Well, he had been outside throwing up in the bushes because he had been out getting drunk the night before. They put us in a tiny little room together because the minister and Robert's dad went off to find a camera because nobody had one. And so while they were gone, we were in this tiny little room. He was sick and hungover, and he decides again, I'm not going to do this. And I went, oh, hell yeah, you are. We are there, and you are going to do this. And so we did. We got married, and we started on the road to a drunken life. I mean, that's all it was. It was the next 20 years of nothing but drinking. I was so delighted when I finally had graduated from college and I could have my own bottle on the kitchen table out in the open and everybody could see it and it didn't matter. And from that day forward, I was a daily drinker. I thought it was the answer. It was my answer. It was the solution to everything that came up. No matter what the problem was, no matter what the issue was, it was the answer. And in those days, I worked for several companies during that time that alcohol was very much encouraged. there were open bars. There was never any much said about anybody being drinking too much at functions. When I was working in public relations, my boss at the time told me that I needed to be more aggressive because we were dealing with legislators and congressmen in Washington and so forth, and entertaining them. And she said, you just got to learn how to be more aggressive. And I said, well, how do you do that? And she said, she handed me a big glass of bourbon. And she said, this will do it. And it did. It really did. And it was just a way of life. And it was a life that we just continued. We would occasionally have some marital issues, as you might imagine. And there was a therapist that we saw every 7 years, like clockwork. He called us the crisis couple, but he never addressed our drinking. He never brought it up. And by the time as we went along, we ended up in Atlanta. Bob got transferred, and we ended up in Atlanta with a house we couldn't afford because there was a little mortgage fraud going on. Our real estate agent lied about my employment because I didn't have a job when we moved, and she claimed that I worked for her real estate firm at a salary that could put us in this house. And so we ended up in this house, but we really couldn't afford it. But we did have booze. We were able to buy booze no matter what happened. So I couldn't find a job, and I looked high and low. There was just no jobs to be had in my field. So I went to work for a sign painter over on Buford Highway in Atlanta. I'd always wanted to learn to be a sign painter because I really wanted to be an artist. And my parents wouldn't, when I went to school, I was supposed to be a high school English teacher and couldn't do that. But, and I stopped into the sign painter shop and I asked him, I said, would you ever take on an apprentice? And he said, sure. So I went to work at the sign painter shop, and he let me paint those paper signs they used to put in the front of meat markets and in grocery stores. And, hamburger, 50 cents a pound or whatever it was back then. And they wouldn't pay me in money, but they paid me in meat. So at least we had meat, and we used Bob's salary for booze. So we had meat and booze, and we just rocked right along there for a while, and hooked up with this therapist here in Atlanta as the issues started to arise, as they do for most alcoholic marriages. And, there's just not really a whole lot to tell about those next years because it was just existence. It was drinking to get through every day. I had learned that at my home growing up. It is, no matter how sad you might feel, how depressed you might feel, booze is the answer. Because my mother was what I call terminally disappointed with life. And my father was unfaithful. And this whole thing had not turned out the way she had planned. Her kids were not what she had hoped for. Her marriage was not what she had hoped for. But she was of that generation that just felt trapped and like she didn't have any choices. And booze was her only escape. My father was also an alcoholic, but he was a kindly, quiet drunk. Mother, on the other hand, was quite hysterical and at times very physical. But I didn't know that, I thought she was just crazy. I didn't know that she was an alcoholic because I didn't know anything about alcoholism. So as time went on, we did, however, adopt a baby after we got to Atlanta. We had started the process in South Carolina, and it had not completed. But when we moved to Georgia, we were able to continue that process, and they did give us a baby. Those, these two drunk people got a 6-month-old baby boy. And the good thing about that for him is that he doesn't have our genes, which is really been a good thing for him. And I have reminded him of that. And he is also reminded that of people that he has brought to the house. He will say, I did tell you I'm adopted, right? Because he wants to make sure that they understand that he is not of our gene pool. But anyway, so as we were rocking along those years, we do have a baby, and things get really, really, really rough as far as the marriage is concerned. And we start seeing this therapist, and 7 years later, we're back at the therapist. 7 years later, we're back at the therapist. And finally, at that point, this is like about year 21 in the marriage. And we were both just daily drinkers. You know, there's nothing exciting about that. It is the, you know, for me, it was the late night desperation type drinking, where the more hopeless I felt, the more I drank. And it was still my only answer. I did not have any other answers for this, the despair that I felt. And I had no idea that alcohol was a depressant and made it worse. I had no idea about that. So I just kept doing it over and over and over. And as it turned out, you know, he was outside carrying, you know, playing out his alcoholism, and I was mostly at home. And I love to drink at night by myself. It's late night drinking. I love to drink and think, and write very sad letters, and you know, throw in a little sad country music on top of that. It just made, you know, just made the whole thing a lot more fun. And I'd also gone back to art by that point, and I would paint at night and drink, and I would have these 2 containers of liquid there on the table beside me, and one would be bourbon and one would be water to wash the brush in. And I would get mixed up sometimes, and I would put the brush in the bourbon. There are a lot of paintings out there that are painted with acrylic paint and bourbon. And I've often wondered, would bugs eat that or something? I don't know, but they're out there somewhere. But I would do that, and you know, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and then finally give in. And then the next day, do it all again. I got to the point where I like to start with, because I didn't think beer was actually drinking, I would drink beer in the afternoon. And while I was cooking, I would drink wine, because all, you know, good cooks do that, and pour a little wine in the food and then drink wine. And then after dinner, I could have the real liquor, when that just, you know, that was the purposeful drinking. That was the drinking I needed to do. And I would stay up, you know, half the night then just drinking because I needed to. I didn't do anything without alcohol. I didn't go to the PTA meeting. I didn't go to the little league game. I didn't go to Kroger without alcohol in my system, because I had gotten to be, that was my maintenance. I was a maintenance drinker every day. But I was functioning. And all the times I drove the carpools, I always had a big Tupperware tumbler of bourbon with me. And I cringe about that now, because you know, what could have happened. I never got stopped. I never once got stopped. I never did any jail time. And like I said, I've got none of the exciting stuff that I hear people talk about. I keep threatening one time I'm going to tell my story, and I'm going to put some stuff in it that didn't really happen, but that would make it, you know, seem a little more fun or something, instead of this poor old sad sack drinking all night, every night. So, in about, let's see, about 1989, I realized that the marriage was over, and I had gotten some information that let me know that things were more serious than I thought. Because up until that point, I had just been able to drink and go, oh, it's no big deal, you know, and doesn't matter. But at that point, that didn't work anymore. And I also found out that I had a health condition that I had to take some medication for, that that you were not supposed to drink with. Well, you know, I had to test that, because it could just be that some people couldn't drink with it. And I found out I could drink with it, and I did drink with it. made me kind of sick at first, but I'm persistent, and I kept at it and got used to it so I could keep on with it. At the exact same time, both of my parents were in the hospital with DTs, down the hall from each other. And so I was going back and forth to Spartanburg in South Carolina. I would get a big gallon jug of wine and put it in the car, because that's not really drinking and driving. I think drinking and driving's, like brown or white liquor. It's not wine or beer's not really drinking and driving. So I would get my big jug in the car and I would drive up there and try to see what needed to be done for them. And they would go home from the hospital finally. And in March of 1989, at the end of March, on the 28th, my father died of liver failure. And 2 weeks later, my mother had a cerebral hemorrhage. And by June 28th, she had died. She had esophageal varices. And so she kind of bled to death from alcohol. Well, at the same time, between those two things happening, I was realizing the marriage was over. So we decided one more time to try this same therapist who would just shake his head when we walked in and puff on his pipe. And so we walked in and he said, I think that you all need to try some dating before you give up. So we said, okay. Well, the only thing we knew to do on a date was go to a bar. I mean, what else do you do? So I told Bob at the time, I said, well, what I have decided to start doing is only have 2 drinks at a time. And if you could only do that, I think we'd be okay. So we decided we would go to this bar and we would each only have 2 martinis. So we end up at this bar and we do disagree on the name of the bar and the location. As we do, if you hear his story, it's going to be very different than mine, because we were not on the same planet if you listen to both of our stories. However, mine is the correct one. I just like to say that before you hear him in a couple of weeks. So we go to this bar, and so we have our two martinis, and he orders a third one. I went, what? And he tells the bartender, he says, bring me one more. I am an alcoholic. And the bartender said, really? And then Bob starts to lose it. He starts to cry. And he says, I'm an alcoholic. Oh, God. I said, bring me one too. Because if he's, he says, the bartender says, I'd like for you to get him out of here. And I said, well, I will, just as soon as I finish this drink. And so we left and we went to Bob's office, which was nearby. And somebody in one of his bar excursions, somebody that he knew had come into the bar with a big book one night. And he said, what is that? And they told him, and they weren't drinking anymore. And so they had some pamphlets, and he took one and he said, well, this would be great for my father-in-law. So I'm not going to say any more about that because that's his story. But so since that had happened, he had this pamphlet from Alcoholics Anonymous, and it had the central office number on it. But first he called a friend of ours in South Carolina that we knew that had been in AA, and he called them and he couldn't reach them. So he called central office and somebody called him back. And that was the beginning of his journey. It was the beginning of my descent into hell, because I just could not believe that this was happening. My father died. I came back from the funeral. Bob was sitting at the kitchen table. He's got all these pamphlets spread out. And I said, what is that? Because I'm on my way to the bar. We bought this house because it had a bar in it. So on my way to the bar, and he said, I'm an alcoholic. I went, oh, God, I don't need this. Just buried my father. My mother's in terrible shape. And you're saying you're an alcoholic. So that started his journey. He went from there. He started going to meetings. He got a sponsor and all of that. I was not happy. I was not happy. I did not like the atmosphere in the house of somebody being there not drinking. Not that he was there much, but at least we did have that in common. And without him drinking, that kind of put the spotlight on mine. And I thought, I made the comment, well, I don't have to drink either, but I don't have to go to those stupid meetings like you're going to. And he said, well, good, that's fine. So I actually joined Al-Anon because I was trying to be a good wife. That did not last long. They invited me that maybe I would want to go into the other room. And I'm very grateful for that today. It took about 6 months. It took about 6 months of me because I loved the 12 and 12. He brought that book home and I sat down and I read it. And I told him, I said, this is a good book. This would be great. If you do this stuff, I think it'll be really good for you. I did not apply it to myself at all. But I was in Al-Anon for about 6 months. And then the people that I got to know there suggested very kindly that maybe I just try out the other rooms. And I had been to some open speaker meetings with Bob, and I made the mistake of saying to the lady that I was using as a sponsor in Al-Anon, I said, that was a really good story that lady told. I really identified with her. And she said, really? And I said, don't you? And she went, I've heard these stories for 20 years and I haven't heard one yet I identified with. I didn't realize I had said a magic word when I said identified. I had no idea that was going to have the effect that it did. So I knew what Alcoholics Anonymous was about by that time, but when I mentioned maybe going to a meeting, well, Bob didn't like that because that was his. AA was his, and I belonged in Al-Anon. So I decided I am going somewhere else that he doesn't go. So I went to another meeting nearby, and they were so kind. I mean, I went in and I said, I don't know what I am, but I've been told that I should check this out. And they said, good, just come back again. Just keep coming back. I've never felt any pressure to say that I was an alcoholic. But the longer I was there, the more I identified, the more I realized that these people were talking about my life. They were talking about the despair that I felt and the depression and the hopelessness and how beat down daily drinking will make you, how dead inside. They all were describing exactly what I was feeling. And I kept coming back. And I finally did pick up a white chip. And that was September of 1989. And I have had the same sponsor for over 30 years. And I am so grateful for her example and the way she lives her life and the way she taught me to live my life without alcohol in the middle of the steps. She was so centered in the steps and how they work and in service work. And that was the type of leadership that I had and mentorship that I had. And I wanted what she had. I wanted the type of life, the joy that she had, the freedom. I could not imagine the freedom of not having to have alcohol, of worrying about how much was there, of having to, fill his bottles, steal from his bottles and then pour other stuff in his bottles to make it look like I hadn't stole from his bottles. And I mean, all those kind of things that everybody does. And the freedom of not having to think about that or not have enough or get in the car without something to drink. I still cannot drive anywhere without something to drink, but now it's usually coffee or water, but I still have that bad compulsion to drink something when I'm driving the car. So I started my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous. I cried a lot. I had a lot of just pent up sadness, that just had never been dealt with and never came out. And I never once did anybody look at me askance. They would just say, keep coming back, just keep coming back. And at one point I even said, I think I felt better drinking. This is too painful. This is just too painful. And they said, yeah, we felt that way too. Just keep coming back. And I did. I was right in the middle. Boy, I landed up in the perfect spot with those women at that meeting, and they held me and guided me and taught me. And I never and did not have to take a drink again. I never did. And I am so very grateful for that. I would not give anything for this journey that I have been on. Learning to put these spiritual principles to work in my life, the 11th step, oh my God, that has opened up such doors of wonder to me. I love to read. I love to read books, spiritual books. I've gone on some wild tangents from time to time. And yet Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps have always been there as the base, and it, to me, that 11th step encourages exploration. And, as you develop that conscious contact with a power greater than yourself, you can explore all kinds of things. Alcoholics Anonymous has such a wide door. It's not one little spot that you can wiggle through. I mean, it's a wide open door that I get to have this greater power of my understanding. And it's always changing. It's always growing. It's always changing. And, and today, all I think of it is a great big mystery. I don't know what it is. It's just a great big mystery, but it is a loving, caring mystery. And I am so grateful to have been introduced to it through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. What a gift. What a gift. I just can't imagine now any life lived another way. Today, our life has been, it's not always a bed of roses. We've encountered illnesses, especially as we get older, more stuff happens. But we have had a lot of laughter. I mean, even during the pandemic, I ended up with a broken leg. Bob ended up being, Nurse Bob. I never dreamed he would have had the ability to be the caring, loving caregiver that he ended up being. And a lot of the guys that know him go, what? True, he did. He did. And I know it's all a result of this program and living these principles and putting them to work. We did not kill each other during the pandemic. We managed to get along just fine. But he has his program and I have mine. And we never have tried to mesh them together to make, one like the other. In this process of staying sober and working the steps, I like to think of 4 words that really keep applying over and over and over. And I think of surrender, I think of acceptance, forgiveness, and gratitude. Those 4 words have been so important, just in getting sober and staying sober. But today, I'm finding that they are just as relevant as they were then. This has been a season lately of a lot of people in our little orbit being ill, a lot of sickness, a lot of suffering, a lot of death. It's just been like a storm that has just been swirling around us. And I'm calling it a season because seasons come and go. And I know that this will, this too shall pass. But it has been sort of all encompassing and overwhelming at times. And it brings me right back to that. It's the same 4 words again: the surrender, acceptance, forgiveness, and gratitude still work, no matter what the problem is, no matter what the circumstances are. I have learned that in Alcoholics Anonymous, that this is a program for every situation, no matter what it is, that I have a power greater than myself that I can draw on. I have people who are only too willing to help around me. I've never known, this much love in one place. And I really believe that the steps really were instrumental in leading me to the question I like to use usually is, I just ask, what does love look like? Right here, right now, what does love look like? When I'm trying to decide what to do in one of these difficult situations, what does love look like right here, right now? And that's where the steps have led me. I never would have thought of something like that before, but now it's like a guiding principle. And and the steps and the prayer and the meditation, everything that I've learned here from each of you, from all of the people, um, has put me right there in that spot. So what I learned in the very beginning, I still do today. It's what it sustains me. It keeps me sober. It keeps me having a joyful life, um, and a great deal of serenity a lot of the time. And I can never express the gratitude that I have for all of that. And thank you for letting me share. And thank you for all of you being here.